I've been saying it every week, but I seriously don't remember a Heisman race this close, this deep into the season in quite some time. We have less than a month left in the regular season, and the Heisman race is wide open. Honestly, there are probably 4 to 6 players who still have a realistic chance of winning the award. So here's my top 10 Heisman rankings as we get ready to enter week 11 of the college football season. Before we get to today's video, make sure to smash that subscribe button and turn on those notifications if you're new to my channel. If you're watching this video, odds are that you love college football, and odds are you aren't subscribed to my channel. So make sure to subscribe to one of the best college football communities here on YouTube. I'm posting college football videos every day during the season, so make sure to subscribe so you never miss a video. Also, make sure to drop a like on this video as well. It helps out with that YouTube algorithm and helps share the video with more college football fans. Plus, it only takes a second to do. Kicking off today's list at number 10 is Alabama quarterback Bryce Young. I say this every week, but Young is still having a solid season for Alabama. He's thrown for 2,200 yards with 19 passing touchdowns and 4 interceptions. But his season isn't quite as good as it was last year, and there have just been a number of quarterbacks that have been better this season. In Alabama's loss this weekend, Bryce Young completed only 49% of his passes while throwing for over 300 yards with a passing touchdown, but he did have an interception. Dorian Thompson-Robinson moves up a spot to number 9. For UCLA this season, he's completing 72% of his passes and has thrown for over 2,100 yards with 19 passing touchdowns. DTR is only 3 touchdowns away from setting a new career high. Meanwhile, on the ground, he's also rushed for 440 yards with 7 rushing scores. DTR has been around UCLA for quite some time, as he's been there since 2018, but he's having a career year in year 5. This past weekend on the road at Arizona State, he threw for only 170 yards, but had 2 passing touchdowns. But most of his damage came on the ground as he rushed for a career high 120 yards. He also tied a season high with his 2 rushing touchdowns. I have Drake May at number 8, and it still feels like I have him ranked way too low. This season for North Carolina, he's completing 71% of his passes and has thrown for 3,000 yards. He has 31 passing touchdowns and only 3 interceptions. Plus, he's also rushed for over 500 yards with 4 rushing scores. May is currently number 4 in the entire country in passing yards, number 1 in passing touchdowns, and he leads the entire nation with 3,500 total yards. This past weekend on the road at Virginia, he threw for 300 yards with 2 passing touchdowns while rushing for 75 yards with a rushing score. It just goes to show how good the Heisman race is this season that the guy who leads all of college football in total yards is down at number 8 on my list. Max Duggan is next at number 7. TCU is undefeated and they're on the verge of their very first playoff appearance. He's completing 66% of his passes and has thrown for 2,400 yards this season. Duggan has 24 passing touchdowns compared to only 2 interceptions. He's also added 300 yards on the ground with 4 rushing scores. He had probably his worst game of the season this past weekend against Texas Tech. He threw for only 200 yards and had 2 passing touchdowns. But Duggan is still putting up some incredible numbers, and TCU is one of the best teams in the entire nation. Caleb Williams comes in at number 6, but once again, he's putting up numbers that should have him a lot higher in the Heisman discussion. He's thrown for 2,800 yards and has 28 passing touchdowns with only 1 interception. He's also rushed for 300 yards with 4 rushing scores as well. He had another fantastic game this weekend against Cal. He threw for 360 yards with 4 passing touchdowns while rushing for 40 yards with a rushing score. For Caleb Williams, he now has 14 passing touchdowns over his last 3 games. And he's also averaging nearly 400 passing yards a game as well. He's putting up incredible numbers, and USC is ranked inside the top 10, but again, it just goes to show there's so many solid candidates this season. Jaden Daniels keeps moving up for me, and after this weekend's victory over Alabama, I got him at number 5. He's completing 70% of his passes and has thrown for 2,000 yards this season. He has 14 passing touchdowns with only 1 interception. Meanwhile, on the ground, he's rushed for over 600 yards and has 10 rushing scores. I get that Daniels might not have as solid numbers as some other players on this list, but what he's been doing over the last month month, and the opponents he's been doing it against have been remarkable. A few weeks ago against Florida, he threw for 350 yards with 3 passing touchdowns while rushing for 3 scores. Then against a top 10 team in Ole Miss, he threw for 250 yards with 2 passing touchdowns while rushing for 120 yards and 3 scores. Then this past weekend against number 6 Alabama, he threw for 200 yards with 2 passing touchdowns while rushing for 100 yards with a rushing score as well. Again, his numbers aren't as good as some other players on this list, but the fact that he's been having career performances against some of the best teams in the country is the reason I have him so high on this list. Blake Corum continues to be the top running back in the nation this season for Michigan. He's rushed for 1,200 yards and is averaging 6 yards a carry. He's also rushed for 16 touchdowns. Corum is currently number 4 in the country in rushing yards, but is number 1 in touchdowns from scrimmage. He had another fantastic showing this past weekend on the road at Rutgers. He rushed for 110 yards with 2 rushing scores. Corum now has a rushing touchdown in all 9 games this season, and it was his 4th game with at least 2 scores. It was also his 6th consecutive game with over 100 rushing yards. In fact, during the 6-game stretch, it was only his 3rd game in which he rushed for fewer than 165 yards. Michigan is still ranked inside the top 4, and he's by far their best player on the team. After having him at number 1 last week, I have Hendon Hooker sliding down to number 3. He's still been fantastic for Tennessee, and he's very much still in the running, but he had his chance for the best game of his career, and it was one of his worst. This past weekend on the road at Georgia, he threw for fewer than 200 yards, his fewest of the entire season. He also didn't throw a touchdown for the first time all season. For Hooker, it's actually the first time since week 1 of the 2021 season that he didn't throw a touchdown pass, and that was a game that he only had 1 passing attempt. Like I mentioned, his chances are still strong as he's completing 71% of his passes for 2,500 yards. He's thrown 21 passing touchdowns with only 2 interceptions, while adding 4 touchdowns on the ground as well. But he had a chance to really solidify his case as the number 1 player, but I think he hurt his chances. I don't have the balls to do it quite yet, but we're getting really close. I have Bo Nix at number 2 in my Heisman race. Of all the quarterbacks near the top, he had the best game this past weekend. Granted, he was playing Colorado, but he still completed 84% of his passes for 300 yards with 2 passing touchdowns, while rushing in 2 touchdowns as well. On the season, Bo Nix is completing over 73% of his passes for 2,500 yards. He's thrown 22 passing touchdowns and has 13 touchdowns on the ground. Bo Nix has the highest pass completion percentage in the entire country, and to go one step further, he has more touchdowns responsible for than any other player with 36. Again, this isn't just a hot stretch, but Bo Nix has been one of the best quarterbacks in all of college football. I mean, who would have thought after the first week of November that Bo Nix would have more touchdowns than any other player in all of college football? But back to number 1, just barely, is Ohio State quarterback CJ Stroud. His numbers on the season are fantastic as he's completing 68% of his passes for 2,500 yards. He's thrown 29 touchdowns with only 4 interceptions. He had his worst game of the season this weekend against Northwestern as he completed only 38% of his passes for 76 yards while adding 79 yards on the ground, a career high. Again, it wasn't the best performance out of all the quarterbacks this weekend, but I think when you take his sample size from the entire season, I give the slight edge to CJ Stroud. But like I mentioned, Bo Nix is barely behind him. If CJ Stroud isn't fantastic this weekend and Bo Nix has another solid showing, I think next week, Bo Nix might actually be number 1 on my list. But as of right now, I have CJ Stroud as the current favorite, ever so slightly. Well, those are the 10 players I currently have in my Heisman race. Was there a player ranked too high or ranked too low, or a player that I didn't mention that should have cracked this list? Whoever you think it is, let me know in the comment section down below. Before you leave, make sure to smash that subscribe button and turn on those notifications if you're new to my channel. If you love college football, then this is definitely the place for you. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm posting videos every day during the season, so make sure to subscribe if you call yourself a college football fan. Also, make sure to drop a like on this video as well. It helps out with that YouTube algorithm and helps share the video with more college football fans. Plus, it only takes a second to do. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.